Lakeside, Michigan, December 25, 2023. I am walking away from the wreckage of a perfect Christmas. The freezing wind burns my face, but it is nothing compared to the coldness waiting inside that house, where the warm lights hide a 3-year lie. My name is Layla Norris, and tonight I am leaving behind the people who call themselves my family, the ones who smiled while they drained my bank account to fund their illusion. I step over the fresh snow, clutching the evidence that will destroy their reputation, moving toward my car to outrun the silence before the scream finally tears the night apart. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. Here is the story. The driveway was paved with fresh asphalt, black and slick under the dusting of Midwestern snow, winding up to a house that looked like it had been ripped straight from a Hallmark movie catalog. Warm, golden light spilled from every window, cutting through the gray December morning. A massive wreath dusted with artificial frost and red berries hung centered on the oak front door, right above a hand-painted wooden sign that read, "Bless this home." It was the picture of traditional American family values, a sanctuary of hard work and togetherness. Or at least that's what my parents wanted the neighbors to see. Standing there with my overnight bag digging into my shoulder, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the one I'd been carrying since I was 16. I was Layla Norris, the financial analyst from the city, the success story, the good daughter who always came back. I took a breath of the biting cold air, steeled myself, and walked inside to play my part. The living room smelled of cinnamon and expensive pine. My mother Marlene had outdone herself with the decor this year. Garland wrapped around the banisters, heavy with ornaments, and the tree was a towering spruce that scraped the vaulted ceiling. My father Douglas sat in his recliner with a mug of coffee, wearing a flannel shirt that looked brand new. And then there was Colton. My younger brother was lounging on the floor, surrounded by torn wrapping paper, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. He was 25, charming in that aimless high school quarterback way that never quite fades in small towns. He looked up as I entered, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. We went through the motions of breakfast, pancakes, bacon, polite questions about my job that were interrupted the moment Colton remembered a funny story about a fishing trip. I waited. I smiled. I played the role of the attentive listener, just like I had when I was studying for AP Calculus at the kitchen table, while they screamed at the television for his football games. Then came the gifts. This was the theater of the Norris family, and the script never changed. My parents led us outside, breathless with excitement. In the driveway, sitting next to my 10-year-old sedan with the grinding transmission, was a brand new lifted pickup truck. It was massive midnight blue, with a red bow the size of a beach ball on the hood. It was fully loaded, the kind of vehicle meant for serious off-roading, or in Colton's case for his outdoor content creator persona he was trying to launch on social media. Douglas clapped Colton on the back, beaming with a pride so intense it looked painful. "For the future of the family," Dad said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're going to put us on the map, son," Colton whooped, jumping into the driver's seat, revving the engine while Mom filmed it all on her phone, narrating for her Facebook friends about how blessed they were. I stood in the cold, forcing a smile, clapping my gloved hands. I wasn't surprised. I shouldn't have been. But the coldness inside me wasn't from the weather. We went back inside for the stocking stuffers, which was usually code for the smaller, thoughtful things. Marlene handed me a small, flat box. My heart gave a pathetic little flutter. Maybe a gift card, maybe a piece of jewelry. I peeled back the paper. Inside was a beige sweater. It wasn't wrapped in tissue, it was just stuffed in the box. I pulled it out. It was thin acrylic and rough to the touch. But what caught my eye, what made the room seem to tilt on its axis, was the plastic security tag still half ripped from the hem, leaving a small hole. Next to it, stuck stubbornly to the fabric, was a bright orange clearance sticker, $500. I looked up, confused, thinking this was a gag gift, a preamble to the real present. But Marlene was watching me, her lips quirked in a tight, self-satisfied smirk. "It's good for the office," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness. Be humble, Layla. Everyone gets what they deserve. Douglas chuckled from his chair, not even looking at me, his eyes fixed on Colton, who was busy syncing his phone to his new truck's Bluetooth. The humiliation hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't the price, it was the message. The truck was an investment, the sweater was an afterthought. The word family suddenly felt less like a comfort and more like a threat. My mind flashed back unbidden to high school. The nights I spent studying by flashlight because I didn't want to wake anyone up, earning the scholarships that paid for my degree. I remembered the night Colton got arrested for smashing mailboxes and Dad drained their savings for bail money without a second thought. I remembered sacrificing the dorm experience to live at home and work 2 jobs during college to save money while they called Colton the future because he could throw a spiral. I had rationalized it for years. That's what American families do. We sacrifice, we lift each other up. But the real sting, the one that made my hands shake as I folded the sweater back into the box, was the financial tether I had unknowingly wrapped around my own neck. 3 years ago, when the world shut down, my parents had called me in a panic. The lakeside event venue they owned, the family legacy, was hemorrhaging money. They told me the bank was going to take everything. They framed it as a patriotic duty, a story of grit and survival. Help us save the family business, Layla, they had pleaded. So I did. I was a financial analyst. I knew numbers. I set up monthly transfers. I sent thousands of dollars every month to cover the mortgage and the operating costs. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was the hero of this story. Yet as I looked around the living room, the poverty narrative cracked. I noticed the new crown molding. I saw the high-end espresso machine on the counter. Through the back window down by the dock, I saw the tarp covering a boat that definitely hadn't been there last summer. These weren't the purchases of people on the brink of foreclosure. A cousin of mine sitting in the corner had leaned over earlier and whispered, "Did your parents ever pay you back for all that help?" I had brushed it off, then defending them out of habit. Now the question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. That night the house was silent. I lay in my childhood bedroom staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling from when I was 12. I couldn't sleep. The image of that orange $5 sticker burned behind my eyelids. I grabbed my phone and opened my banking app. I didn't just look at the balance. I went to the history. I filtered by transfers to my parents. I pulled up the spreadsheet app on my phone and started inputting the numbers. Month after month, year after year. The mortgage payments, the emergency venue repairs, the loan I co-signed to get them a better rate. The final number stared back at me, glowing blue in the dark room. It was staggering. It was enough for a down payment on a house in the city. It was enough to buy Colton's new truck 3 times over. I had been eating ramen and driving a car that shook when it went over 60 while they were buying boats and remodeling the living room with my money. My breathing hitched. The realization washed over me, cold and absolute. This wasn't just favoritism. This wasn't just a quirky family dynamic. They had looked at me and seen a resource to be mined. They had looked at Colton and seen a star to be polished. I whispered into the empty room, the silence pressing against my eardrums. That's when I realized my family hadn't just used me. They were trying to erase me. To understand the silence in my bedroom, that Christmas night, you have to rewind 3 years. You have to go back to the moment the trap was set, baited, not with malice, but with a desperate patriotic plea that tugged at the very core of who I thought I was. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. My mother's voice was tight, trembling just enough to trigger my fight-or-flight response. She told me the venue, the Norris Lakeside Estate, was 3 months behind on payments. She painted a picture of imminent doom, of bank managers in dark suits coming to padlock the doors and strip away the legacy my grandfather had started and my father had expanded. "We built this from nothing, Layla," she had said, her voice cracking. "You're our success story. You're the one who made it out. We just need you to help us keep the dream alive until the season picks up." I was 24, fresh into my first significant promotion at the firm, finally making the kind of money that felt like adulthood. I felt a surge of pride. I could be the savior. I could be the dutiful daughter who stepped up when the chips were down. I agreed to help, thinking I was writing a check, not signing away my freedom. They didn't ask for a loan over the phone, though. They scheduled a family celebration dinner at the nicest steakhouse in the county the next time I visited. We sat in a high-backed leather booth, the restaurant humming with the low murmur of small-town gossip. Halfway through the appetizers, my father didn't raise a toast. He slid a thick manila envelope across the white tablecloth. It wasn't just a request for cash. It was a complete financial restructuring. They wanted me to set up direct recurring transfers for the mortgage and the venue's primary business loan. Worse, there were papers for a refinance listing me as a co-borrower to secure a better rate because their credit had taken a hit during the slow season. I froze, my fork hovering over my salad. I looked at the papers, then at my parents. They were smiling, but their eyes were hard, expectant. Around us, neighbors and friends were dining, waving at Layla Norris, the local business icon. If I said no, if I caused a scene, I would be the ungrateful brat shaming her struggling parents in public. The pressure was invisible but crushing, like gravity turning up. "Don't embarrass us," my mother's eyes seemed to say. So I picked up the pen. I signed. I anchored myself to their sinking ship, believing I was the captain who would steer them to safety. At first, the gratitude was overwhelming. "Thank you, Layla," and "we couldn't do this without you." But gratitude has a short shelf life in my family. What started as an emergency stopgap rapidly calcified into a monthly bill I couldn't cancel. The temporary assistance stretched from 3 months to 6, then a year. The thank yous evaporated, replaced by an expectant silence. If the transfer was even a day late, I'd get a text. "Did you forget us?" Not "Are you okay?" Just a reminder of my function. I was no longer a daughter. I was a utility, as essential and impersonal as the electric company. I told myself it was temporary. But temporary became routine. Routine became obligation. And obligation became the only language my parents understood. To keep the transfers flowing, I began to cannibalize my own life. When my college friends planned a trip to Italy, I claimed I was too busy with work, scrolling through their photos from my cubicle while eating a $3 sandwich. My car, a sedan pushing 200,000 miles, developed a transmission slip that made merging onto the highway a terrifying gamble. I ignored the mechanic's advice to replace it because the $2,000 for the repair was already earmarked for the venue's property tax. I wore my clothes until the hems frayed, while my co-workers bought homes and invested in their 401ks. I was living like a broke student on a financial analyst's salary, pouring my future into a hole in the ground back home. The bitterness didn't start with the lack of money, though. It started with the things I saw on Instagram. While I was skipping lunch to save $10, the Norris Lakeside estate was posting updates. "Look at our new lighting system," one caption read, showing off chandeliers that cost more than my car. A month later, it was a completely redesigned bridal suite with marble countertops. "Reinvesting in the business," Dad told me when I asked. But then there was Colton. My brother didn't have a job, he had passions. First it was drone photography. Suddenly he had a $2,000 DJI setup. Then it was podcasting requiring a studio-quality mic and mixer. Then fishing vlogs necessitating a new boat motor. Every time I came home, the house was filled with new gadgets, new furniture, new toys. The struggle narrative they fed me was a lie. They weren't struggling to survive. They were struggling to maintain a luxury lifestyle, and I was the subsidy. The breaking point was a quiet one. It happened 6 months ago during a summer visit. I was sitting on the back porch, hidden by the screen door, when I heard my parents discussing the venue's future. They were looking at blueprints spread out on the patio table. "The glass pavilion will go right here," Douglas said, pointing to the lawn. "It'll double our capacity for winter weddings." It was a massive expansion, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Marlene hesitated for a second, not about the cost but the logistics. "What about the bank payments if we take on more debt?" Douglas waved his hand dismissively. Don't worry. Layla always manages things. She'll figure it out. Marlene nodded, taking a sip of her iced tea. You're right. She always does. I stood there paralyzed. They weren't discussing me as a partner or a savior. They were discussing me like a line item in a budget, a resource that would simply expand to meet their desires. I wasn't a person with dreams or limits. I was the failsafe. And the town played right along. Every time I ran into someone at the grocery store, they'd say, "Your parents are such pillars of this community. It's amazing how they've kept that place afloat and kept jobs local." I would smile and nod, feeling complicit in a massive fraud. They praised the Norrises for their resilience, never knowing that the foundation of that resilience was their daughter's stolen future. Back in my bedroom on Christmas night, the spreadsheet on my phone finally tallied the total. I looked at the number at the bottom of the column. It was colossal. It was the price of the luxury truck sitting in the driveway. It was a hefty down payment on a house in the suburbs. It was 3 years of my life liquidated and transferred into their account. I closed my laptop, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The realization was no longer a vague suspicion. It was a mathematical fact. I looked at the darkness of the room and thought, if they can do this to me in the name of family, what else are they willing to do? The morning light filtered through the frosted windows, sharp and unforgiving, illuminating the living room like a stage set for a play I no longer wanted to be in. The air was thick with the scent of cinnamon buns and roasting coffee, but underneath it, I smelled the stale tang of performative joy. Colton was parading around the living room, a peacock in human form. He was wearing a designer hoodie that I knew cost upwards of $300, ironic, considering he hadn't held a steady paycheck in 2 years. He was loud, taking up all the oxygen in the room, boasting about his brand deals and future collaborations to anyone who would listen. My parents hung on his every word, their eyes shining with a desperate sort of hope. "This is it, son," my dad said, clapping him on the shoulder. "2024 is the year everyone finally sees what we see." They didn't ask about my promotion. They didn't ask about the 60-hour weeks I'd pulled to secure the bonus that was currently sitting in their bank account. I was just part of the furniture, a prop to make the room look full. All right, gift time. Just like old times," Marlene announced, her voice pitched an octave too high. She herded us toward the tree, insisting we sit in our assigned spots from childhood. It was a staged celebration, a ritual reenactment of a happiness that hadn't existed in years. I sat on the edge of the sofa, watching as the spectacle began. It was a slaughter. Colton was showered with boxes, high-end noise-canceling headphones, a GoPro with every conceivable attachment, a new tackle box filled with expensive lures, and piles of branded apparel with his logo, a jagged C that looked like a sports drink mascot embroidered on hats and vests. I did the mental math as the paper flew. The embroidery alone cost a fortune. I knew where that money came from. It came from the venue maintenance fund I had transferred last month. Then came my turn. Marlene handed me a small, dense bag. I reached in and pulled out a candle. It was generic, smelling vaguely of artificial vanilla. "Thank you," I said, my voice flat. Next was a calendar. I flipped it over and saw a patch of whiteout on the back cover where someone else's name had been scribbled out. It was a regift, a freebie from a local insurance agent that they hadn't even bothered to clean up. I felt a stinging heat behind my eyes, not of sadness, but of pure distilled humiliation. They weren't just neglecting me, they were mocking me. But the grand finale was yet to come. "Okay, everyone outside the big one," Douglas shouted, practically vibrating with excitement. We all trooped out into the biting cold. The driveway was already lined with a few neighbors and cousins' phones out ready to record. My parents had invited an audience. They led Colton to the massive shape under the tarp I had seen earlier. With a dramatic flourish, Douglas yanked the cover off. The midnight blue truck gleamed in the winter sun, massive and aggressive. The crowd cheered. Colton screamed, falling to his knees in a theatrical display of gratitude before leaping up to hug my parents. You guys are the best," he yelled. A neighbor holding up an iPhone called out, "Wow, Doug, How'd you swing that beauty after the hard couple of years you've had? Marlene didn't miss a beat. She turned to the camera beaming and said, God provides and hard work pays off. We believe in investing in our children. I stood on the periphery, shivering in my coat, feeling like a ghost. God provides, I wanted to scream. I provided. That truck was my transmission. That truck was my skipped vacations. That truck was my life converted into steel and rubber for my brother to drive into a ditch. We shuffled back inside, the adrenaline of the reveal slowly fading into a cozy contentment for everyone but me. There was one last box for me sitting lonely under the tree. The infamous socks. I knew what was in there, but opening it in front of the audience, my aunts, uncles, the cousins still lingering, made it final. I tore the paper. I held up the socks. The clearance tag dangled like an accusation. Marlene sipped her cocoa, looking at me over the rim of her mug. Be humble, Layla, she said, her voice smooth, loud enough for the room to hear. Everyone gets what they deserve. Douglas and Colton laughed, a deep, satisfied sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the sound of a cable finally giving way under years of tension. The room went quiet in my head. The laughter seemed to slow down, warping into something grotesque. I looked at them, my mother's smug satisfaction, my father's oblivious pride, my brother's unearned arrogance. I saw the last 3 years in rapid flashes. I saw myself eating peanut butter toast for dinner for a week so I could make the transfer. I saw the overdraft alert on my phone the day I paid their property tax. I heard my boss congratulating me on a bonus that I never got to spend on myself. It hit me then with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't just taken my money because they needed it. They had taken it because they felt entitled to it. They redirected my survival into their luxury. They were building a shrine to Colton using the bricks of my life. I looked at the socks in my hand, then at the truck keys spinning on Colton's finger. They didn't just take my money, I thought, the words crystallizing in my mind. They tried to erase me from the story of their success. They wanted my resources, but they didn't want me. They wanted the check, but not the daughter. I felt the hurt curdle. It cooled, hardened, and turned into something sharp and precise. I felt a strange calm settle over me, a numbness that was far more dangerous than rage. I carefully folded the socks and placed them back in the box. Dinner's almost ready, an aunt called out from the kitchen. Everyone started moving toward the dining room, chattering about the truck and the food. I stood up slowly. I walked to the table. I sat down. The noise of the family washed over me, but I wasn't part of it anymore. I was an observer, a spy in the house of my enemies. I picked up my fork, looking at the spread of food, bought in part with the credit card I paid off every month. I forced a smile. It felt tight plastic, but it held. I looked at Marlene. You know, I said, my voice quiet but steady, cutting through a lull in the conversation. You're right. Marlene looked at me confused. About what, honey? Everyone does get what they deserve. My tone was different. It wasn't the submissive daughter's voice. It was cold, flat, deadly. But in the chaos of passing rolls and pouring gravy, no one noticed. No one except my cousin's camera, which was panning across the table for a family Christmas story. I looked straight into the lens. I didn't blink. I stared right into the digital eye, letting the recording witness the look on my face. It was the face of someone who was done paying the ransom. It was the face of someone who was about to burn the ledger. The house finally settled into silence around 11:30 p.m. The heavy rhythmic snoring of my father drifted down the hall, and the occasional creak of floorboards signaled that the performance of the perfect Christmas was over for the night. I sat in my old bedroom, the air cold and still. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the cheap candle against the wall or shred the clearance socks. That would have been satisfying in a visceral way, but it wouldn't have changed anything. Emotion was what got me into this mess. Logic was the only thing that would get me out. I sat cross-legged on the twin bed I'd slept in since middle school, opened my laptop, and initiated a quiet war. I pulled up the spreadsheet I had started building earlier. It was a grid of pure exploitation. I categorized every transaction from the last 36 months: mortgage, venue insurance, renovation loan, utilities, Colton's business expenses. Seeing it in black and white was different than feeling it in the abstract. The sum wasn't just a number, it was a verdict. I had poured a fortune into this family, and my return on investment was a pair of $5 socks and a lecture on humility. But I wasn't just looking for the total anymore. I was looking for the fine print. I navigated to my secure cloud storage where I kept digital copies of everything I had ever signed. I pulled up the refinance documents from 2 years ago, the ones they had slid across the steakhouse table while I was chewing on a piece of bread, terrified of making a scene. I began to read, not as a daughter trusting her parents, but as a financial analyst auditing a hostile entity. I scanned the legalese, the clauses, the liability statements. And then I stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I zoomed in on paragraph 4, section B. In the rush to get the loan approved and secure the lowest possible interest rate, the bank had required more than just a guarantor. They had required an asset holder. My name wasn't just on the loan as the person who paid if they defaulted. My name was on the deed. I was listed as a co-owner with joint tenancy. A cold, sharp smile touched my lips. I don't think my parents even realized what they had done. They were so focused on the cash injection, so used to signing whatever was put in front of them to keep the illusion alive, that they hadn't read the terms. They thought they had simply shackled me to the debt. In reality, they had handed me the keys to the kingdom. I wasn't just the helper, I was a legal owner of the property. I had standing. And in the state of Michigan, a joint tenant has the right to force a sale if the partnership is no longer viable. The shift inside me was seismic. I went from feeling like a victim of a scam to a strategist holding a royal flush. I stopped seeing myself as the daughter they had sacrificed. I saw myself as a majority shareholder in a failing business. I cracked my knuckles and opened my email client. I didn't send anything yet. It was too late for business hours, but I drafted them, saving them to my outbox with ruthless precision. First, an email to the mortgage servicer. I formally notified them that I would no longer be authorizing automatic transfers from my personal accounts, effective immediately. I removed my bank details from the payment portal. Second, an email to the commercial lender for the venue. I drafted a request for a full statement of arrears and a payoff quote, copying the real estate attorney I had quietly consulted months ago, just in case. Third, the nuclear option. I drafted a letter to my parents CCing their family attorney, an old friend of Dad's who would undoubtedly panic when he saw the legal statutes I was citing. The subject line was simple: notice of intent to sever joint tenancy and petition for partition sale. I wasn't just leaving, I was detonating the foundation. With the legal groundwork laid, I turned to the emotional evidence. I needed to document the insult. I reached over to the nightstand and grabbed the box of socks. I set them on the bedspread next to my phone. On the screen, I pulled up the banking app displaying a transfer from last month, $4,500, venue, tax, and Reno. I arranged the socks so the orange clearance tag was clearly visible next to the glowing screen. I snapped a photo, then another. It was a brutal juxtaposition, the massive sacrifice versus the pitiful reward. I looked at the image and mentally captioned it for a future that was rapidly approaching 3 years. Thousands of dollars. Today I got socks. Today I stopped paying. Today I stopped letting my family erase me. I saved the photo to a hidden album. It was insurance. If they tried to spin the narrative, and I knew they would, I had the receipts. It was 12:45 a.m. now. The house felt different. It was no longer a home. It was just a building I partially owned. I moved silently through the room, packing my things. I didn't take everything, just what mattered. My laptop, my documents, the few clothes I actually liked. I left the sweater. I left the candle. I zipped my suitcase, the sound loud in the quiet room, but no one stirred. I crept out into the hallway, navigating the darkness by memory. I passed the family wall in the corridor. I paused, shining my phone's flashlight on the frames. There was Colton center stage in his football uniform, Colton graduating, Colton holding a fish. And there I was, in the periphery of a group shot, half my face obscured by a shadow, or standing in the back row of a reunion photo. They had cropped me out of the narrative long before tonight. I was the ghost in the machine, invisible, until the machine stopped working. I walked into the living room. The Christmas tree was still glowing, the timer set to keep the lights twinkling until dawn. It cast long, dancing shadows across the floor. The pile of Colton's gifts sat in a heap of gluttony, the boxes for the headphones, the camera, the gear. It looked like a shrine to a golden calf. I reached into my bag and pulled out a plain white envelope. Inside was a printed summary of the emails in my draft folder, along with a formal letter stating that my financial support had ended, citing the specific dollar amount I had contributed to date. It also included a copy of the deed highlighting my name. I sealed it. No Merry Christmas, no I'm sorry, no hearts or smiley faces, just the paperwork. At exactly 1:00 a.m., I crouched down and placed the envelope on the tree skirt right in front, where it would be the first thing they saw when they came down to bask in the afterglow of their greed. I stood up and looked at the room one last time. The "Bless This Home" sign in the entryway seemed to mock me. I tightened my grip on my suitcase handle. The fear was gone. The guilt was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard clarity of the bottom line. "If they can't see what they've done to me," I whispered to the empty room, "the bank will." The front door clicked shut behind me at exactly 1:10 a.m. The sound was small, metallic, and final. I stepped off the porch and into the biting wind, my boots crunching softly on the snow-dusted pavement. The house stood silent behind me, a glowing monument to a lie holding its breath before the inevitable collapse. I didn't look back. I walked straight to my car, the cold air burning my lungs in a way that felt like purification. I threw my suitcase into the back seat and climbed into the driver's seat, my breath fogging in the frigid interior. Before I started the engine, I had one last thing to do. I turned on the dome light, casting a sickly yellow glow over the passenger seat. I arranged the props for my exit. I placed the pair of clearance socks with the torn tag and the $5 sticker face up. Next to them, I propped up my phone. On the screen, I had the banking app open to a screenshot of a single transfer from last month, $200. Mortgage and venue insurance. I took the photo. Then I opened Facebook, the digital town square where every aunt, cousin, high school teacher, and nosy neighbor in my hometown lived and breathed. I uploaded the side-by-side image. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard for a second, trembling, not from cold, but from adrenaline. I typed the caption I had drafted in my head 1,000 times over the last hour. I sacrificed 3 years of my life and over $80,000 to keep the family business afloat. My parents ambushed me with paperwork, used my credit to fund their lifestyle, and then left me to drown in their debt. They tried to erase me from the story of their success while living off my paycheck. This is me writing my own ending. I'm done paying for a life I'm not allowed to live. I hit post. Then I shared it to my Instagram story. I watched the progress bar complete, turning my private truth into public record. As soon as the posted notification appeared, I held down the power button on my phone and swiped to shut it off. The screen went black. I tossed it onto the passenger seat, turned the key in the ignition, and backed out of the driveway. As I pulled onto the main road, leaving the lakeside estate in my rearview mirror, I didn't feel sadness. I felt the kind of terrifying freedom you feel when you jump out of a plane. I drove the 3 hours back to the city in silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the hum of the tires and the rhythmic sweep of the wipers clearing away the light snow. I arrived at my apartment at 4:30 a.m., exhausted but wired. I slept fitfully, waking up to the gray light of a city morning. It was 10:00 a.m. The fallout had begun hours ago. I made a cup of coffee, sat at my kitchen island, and turned my phone back on. The device nearly vibrated off the table. Notifications cascaded down the screen in a blur of banners, texts, missed calls, voicemails, tags, comments. It was a digital avalanche. What did you do? Layla, call your mother immediately. Is this real? I can't believe you posted that. The sheer volume was overwhelming. I scrolled past the hysteria and found a text from Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who lived 2 houses down from my parents. She had sent a voice memo at 8:15 a.m. I pressed play. Mrs. Gable's voice was hushed, panicked. Layla, honey, what is going on over there? Is everyone okay? I was walking the dog, and I heard... She stopped speaking, and in the background of the recording through the static, I heard it. It was a scream. It wasn't a scream of pain or fear. It was a raw, animalistic shriek of rage. It was Marlene. It was the sound of a narcissist whose mask had been ripped off in the center of town square. It was the sound of the illusion shattering. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, but it was followed by a grim satisfaction. She wasn't screaming because she missed me. She was screaming because I had taken my wallet with me. I switched to my email. The legal dominoes were already falling faster than I expected. The mortgage company had auto-replied to my notice confirming receipt and flagging the account for review. The lender for the venue, however, had sent a personalized response to the email I'd copied them on. Ms. Norris, regarding your notice of withdrawal. Please be advised the account is currently past due. We require immediate updated financial disclosures from all guarantors. I stared at the screen. Past due, I had sent the money. I realized then that my parents hadn't just been using my money for the bills. They had been skimming off the top, floating the payments, gambling that I would cover the difference eventually. They were drowning even with my life raft. Then came the blame storm. I opened the text thread with my mother. It was a wall of blue bubbles escalating from confusion to vitriol. Where are you? How could you do this to us on Christmas? Take that post down now. You are destroying this family's good name. You are heartless. After everything we did for you, you're jealous of your brother. That's all this is. You're trying to ruin his moment. Not once did she ask why I left. Not once did she mention the money. Not once did she deny the numbers. She only attacked the exposure. She was furious that the audience had seen behind the curtain. I opened Facebook. The post had gone nuclear. In a small town, gossip travels faster than light, and I had just given them a supernova. The comment section was a war zone. Half the town, the ones who worshipped the ground Douglas walked on, were defending them. Ungrateful daughter, one comment read. Spoiled brat doesn't know the meaning of family, said another. But there was a shift. Screenshots of my bank transfer were circulating in the comments. People I hadn't spoken to in years, old classmates, former employees of the venue, were quietly liking the post. My inbox had messages from people who knew the truth but had never spoken up. I always wondered how they afforded those renovations. One message read, I had no idea, Layla. You don't deserve this. The rupture was complete. I had forced the community to choose sides. The pillars of the community were cracking and everyone was watching. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from a cousin, one of the few who usually stayed neutral. Layla, it's bad here. Uncle Doug is pacing the yard. Marlene is hysterical. They're telling everyone you're lying. They're saying you never sent a dime and that you're mentally unstable. They're spinning a whole story about how you stole from them. You gonna let them say that I looked at the message then, at the stack of bank statements I had printed out sitting neatly on my counter? I looked at the legal acknowledgement from the bank. I looked at the spreadsheet that detailed every single cent I had bled for them. I felt a profound sense of calm. I didn't need to argue in the comments section. I didn't need to scream back. Let them talk, I whispered to the empty apartment, tapping the screen to close the message. The paper doesn't lie. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, grinding disintegration that I watched from a safe distance, like observing a demolition through a telescope. In the weeks and months following Christmas, I didn't return to my hometown, but the news found its way to me. It came in screenshots sent by sympathetic friends in hushed voicemails from former neighbors. and eventually in public court filings that anyone with an internet connection could access. The first domino to fall was the most visible one. 3 weeks after I stopped the transfers, the repo man came for Colton's truck. It wasn't a quiet affair. According to Mrs. Gable, who seemed to have taken up a permanent post at her front window, the tow truck arrived at noon on a Saturday. Colton had apparently tried to argue with the driver, shouting about banking errors and brand misunderstandings, but the repo man just hooked up the midnight blue beast and dragged it away. The red bow was long gone, and so was the pride. The neighbors didn't applaud this time, they just recorded it. Then came the venue. The Norris Lakeside estate didn't have a grand closing ceremony. There was no farewell party, no tearful thank you post to the community. It just stopped. The gates were padlocked one Tuesday morning. The website went dark. The Book Your Dream Wedding sign was removed, leaving a pale, ghost-like rectangle on the brick facade where the sun hadn't touched for years. The rumors started immediately. It wasn't just the bank, it was the contractors. The caterers, the florists, the landscapers who had installed the new gazebo, none of them had been paid. Liens started piling up at the county clerk's office like snowdrifts. The same townspeople who had praised my parents as pillars of the community began to whisper the truth that had been hidden under fresh paint and borrowed money. The Norrises didn't pay their bills. They never had. They had just used my credit rating as a shield to hide their insolvency. My parents tried to fight the narrative, of course. They doubled down on the lies. I heard from a cousin that Marlene was telling anyone who would listen at the grocery store that I had abandoned the family in their time of need. She spun a tale that I was mentally unstable, jealous of Colton's rising fame, and that I was trying to ruin them out of spite. She stole from us, they'd say vaguely, never specifying what was stolen, relying on the ambiguity to smear my name. But lies have a hard time standing up against foreclosure notices printed in the local paper. The bank didn't care about their story. The bank only cared about the mortgage I was no longer paying. The illusion they had worshipped the image of the wealthy, benevolent local dynamos was rotting in the daylight. While their world was shrinking, mine was finally expanding. For the first time in my adult life, my paycheck belonged to me. The feeling was intoxicating. I didn't go on a spending spree. The habits of scarcity were hard to break. But I made changes. I sold the sedan with the failing transmission and bought a car that was safe, sensible, and less than 5 years old. It didn't have a lift kit or a custom paint job, but it started every time I turned the key, and that was a luxury I hadn't known I was missing. I moved out of my cramped studio and into a one-bedroom apartment with big windows and a balcony. It was bright, airy, and most importantly, it was mine. I bought furniture that didn't come from a dumpster dive. I filled the fridge with food I actually wanted to eat. I also started doing the work I should have done years ago. I found a therapist, a sharp woman named Dr. Evans, who didn't let me get away with minimizing what happened. In her office, I finally put names to the things I had experienced: financial abuse, emotional neglect, enmeshment. "You weren't a partner in that family, Layla," she told me one afternoon. "You were a utility. You were the load-bearing wall they kept hammering nails into." I realized she was right. I had spent my life thinking I was the problem, that I wasn't giving enough, wasn't grateful enough. In reality, I was the solution they refused to manage without. They had used the concept of family not as a bond of love, but as a weapon to erase my individuality and serve their needs. And then there was Michael. I met him at a coffee shop near my new office. Michael Reyes, a landscape architect with kind eyes and hands rough from work. It was slow at first. I was waiting for the catch, waiting for the moment he would ask for a loan or complain about his rent. But the moment never came. On our third date, when the check came, I instinctively reached for my wallet, my heart rate spiking, ready to cover it, to keep the peace. Michael gently stopped my hand. "I've got this one," he said, smiling. "You get the next one, or we can split it. Whatever makes you comfortable." It was such a small thing, but I nearly cried right there in the bistro. He respected my boundaries. He had his own life, his own savings, his own dignity. He didn't need me to fix him, he just wanted to know me. But the past has a way of trying to claw you back. As the foreclosure date on the lakeside house loomed, the peace talks began. Extended family members, aunts and uncles who had watched me eat scraps at Christmas for years without saying a word, started blowing up my phone. They came with the classic enabler scripts. "Life is too short to hold grudges," one uncle texted. "They're still your parents, you only get one set." An aunt messaged, "Can't we just have a family meeting and put this behind us?" A year ago, those messages would have broken me. I would have caved, desperate to be the good daughter again. Now I saw them for what they were. They weren't interested in justice or my well-being. They were interested in comfort. My rebellion made things awkward for them. My refusal to pay made the family look bad. They wanted me to return to my role as the silent ATM, so they could go back to pretending everything was perfect. They wanted to restore the convenience of my exploitation. The final straw came on a Tuesday evening. I was cooking dinner with Michael, chopping vegetables in my bright, peaceful kitchen. My phone buzzed. It was my Aunt Sarah Marlene's sister. I answered on speaker, my hands wet. "Layla," she said, her voice tight with self-righteousness. "I just got off the phone with your mother. She's a wreck. She's willing to talk to you, to maybe even forgive you for the embarrassment you caused, but she says you have to apologize first. She needs to know you're sorry for walking out on the family." Michael stopped chopping. He looked at me, his expression fierce and protective. But he didn't speak. He let me handle it. I wiped my hands on a towel. I felt a profound stillness in my chest. No anger, no fear. Just the absolute certainty of a woman who knows her own worth. "Apologize," I asked calmly. "For what?" "For paying their mortgage for 3 years, for letting them humiliate me, for refusing to set myself on fire so they could stay warm." "Layla, be reasonable," Aunt Sarah started. "I am being reasonable," I cut her off. "I'm finally being reasonable with my own life. Tell Mom I'm not sorry, and tell her I'm not coming back." I tapped the red icon to end the call. I looked at Michael. He smiled a genuine, proud smile. I put the phone down, face down on the counter. I didn't block the number. I just walked back to the stove and stirred the pot. The silence in the room feeling like a victory song. It was late October, almost a full year since the Christmas that burned everything down, when I found myself driving down the familiar 2-lane highway that skirted the edge of my hometown. The leaves were turning, painting the Midwest in brilliant shades of rust and gold, a stark contrast to the gray slush of that fateful December. I wasn't alone this time. Michael was in the passenger seat of my car, the sensible, reliable SUV I had bought with my own money, humming along to the radio, his hand resting warmly on my knee. We were heading north for a hiking trip, a route that inevitably took us past the wreckage of my past. As we rounded the bend that hugged the lake, the property came into view. I slowed down, not out of nostalgia, but out of a need to witness the reality of it. The Norris lakeside estate was unrecognizable. The wrought iron gates, once polished to a shine, were chained shut with a heavy industrial padlock. The sign that had proudly displayed the family name was gone, leaving behind a pale rectangular scar on the brickwork where the mortar had been scrubbed clean. The expansive lawn where my father had once dreamed of building a glass pavilion was knee-high with weeds. The gazebo was still there, but the white paint was peeling and the roof looked swayed, as if the weight of the lies that built it had finally become too much to bear. It looked small. That was the most shocking part. In my memory and in the looming shadow it cast over my life, the venue had been a fortress, a massive empire that demanded constant tribute. But seeing it now, stripped of the manicured landscaping and the expensive lighting, it was just a building. It was just a pile of brick and wood that couldn't pay for itself. It looked shrunken, as if without my fear and my money to inflate it, it had withered away. The silence surrounding it wasn't peaceful. It was desolate. It was the silence of a stage after the actors have been fired and the audience has gone home. Michael noticed I had slowed down. He looked out the window at the shuttered property, then back at me. He knew the story, all of it. He knew about the socks, the truck, the screaming voicemails. He reached over and squeezed my hand gently. "Do you want to stop?" he asked, his voice low and devoid of judgment. "We can drive by the house, check on them, or just see it." I stared at the overgrown driveway. I thought about who might be inside the main house up the hill. I thought about my mother probably still spinning narratives about her victimhood to anyone who would listen. I thought about my father likely sitting in a recliner he could no longer afford, waiting for a bailout that wasn't coming. I searched inside myself for a spark of curiosity or even a flicker of guilt. I looked for that old reflex, the one that used to scream, "Go fix it. Go save them." I found nothing. The well was dry. The tether had been severed. "No," I said, pressing my foot down on the accelerator. The engine hummed responsive and smooth. "I already know how their story ends. I'm busy writing mine." As the venue disappeared in the rearview mirror, replaced by the open road, I began to think about the values they had hammered into me since birth. They had preached about the American dream, about resilience, about the sanctity of family, and the nobility of sacrifice. For years, I thought I was failing those values because I couldn't keep them happy. But as the miles ticked by, I realized the irony. I was the one who had actually lived them. I was the one who showed resilience by rebuilding my life from zero. I was the one building a community, a chosen family of friends, colleagues, and a partner who respected my boundaries rather than relying on a bloodline that viewed me as a resource. I had found personal freedom, not by inheriting it, but by claiming the right to say no, the right to walk away, the right to stop being the fuel for someone else's fire. I knew they hadn't apologized. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that they never would. There would be no tearful reunion, no admission of guilt. In their version of reality, I was still the villain who ruined Christmas. And for the first time in my life, I was okay with that. I stopped waiting for the text that would make it all make sense. I stopped rehearsing the speeches I would give them to make them understand. I realized that closure isn't getting the other person to admit they were wrong. Closure is looking in the mirror and deciding that you refuse to be erased anymore. My life now was vibrant and loud in the best ways. I thought about the dinner party I had hosted last week, the sound of laughter filling my apartment, wine-spilling friends shouting over a board game joy that didn't come with a price tag or a guilt trip. I thought about the promotion I had just accepted, a senior analyst role that might require a move to Chicago next year. I hadn't asked my parents for permission. I hadn't worried about who would pay the venue's insurance if I left. I just said yes, because it was what I wanted. I was planning a future where my money built my life, where my labor secured my safety, where my love was returned, not consumed. People always say that blood is thicker than water. It's the ultimate trump card used to keep you in line, to make you tolerate the intolerable. But as I looked at Michael, and at the road stretching out ahead of us toward the mountains, I thought about the rest of that quote, the part people usually leave out. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. Sometimes the people who share your DNA are the first ones to ambush you when you stop bleeding for them. And sometimes the bonds you choose are the ones that actually save you. My greatest act of revenge wasn't the Facebook post or the lawsuit or the foreclosure. It was this. It was the fact that I survived. It was the fact that I was breathing easy. It was the fact that I had allowed the consequences of their choices to finally land on them instead of catching them with my own body. As we drove toward the horizon, the sun breaking through the clouds to light up the autumn trees in a blaze of glory, I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that finally felt like my own. They lost the house, the venue, and the image they worshipped. I lost a family that never really saw me. In the end, I didn't lose anything at all. I finally got my life back. Layla's journey serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes walking away is the strongest move you can make. If you enjoyed this story of reclaiming independence, please Please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. What would you have done in her shoes? Let us know down below. We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.